John Steinbeck is probably best known for his novels about the human condition, uh, about migrant workers and the common man, the common laborer, trying to make a better life, um, fighting against injustice, loneliness, and limitations not only of the society but with themselves. In that vein, probably his three novels that come to mind that sort of exemplify that are the so-called California novels, In Dubious Battle, 1936, Of Mice and Men, 1937, and of course the Pulitzer Prize winning Grapes of Wrath, 1939. They were all set in the Great Depression, and again, Steinbeck was very sympathetic towards the plight of the common working man. And these were the themes I think that he is best known for. Uh, Also, these novels are also set in the Salinas Valley, where Steinbeck was born. The Salinas Valley is about 120 miles or so south of San Francisco, and he was born actually in the town of Salinas. During that time, he was born in 1902, and he learned a lot about the land. Okay, Monterey County was and is still called the salad bowl capital of the world. All right, there's such fertile land and lots to be farmed. It's very rich, and he began to get a great understanding of the connection of people and the land, how important it was to them. This connection informed a lot of his novels, especially the California novels. Um, he was born of German-Irish descent, and the original family name was Gross Steinbeck. Okay, his father was a treasurer in Monterey County, and his mother Olive was a teacher. And unlike many writers, she fostered a love of reading and writing in her son. And he became very, very knowledgeable, not only in terms of technical writing, but about the land itself. He paid a lot of attention to what people did, how they worked the land, and the land itself is really a setting for a lot of his novels. It's an important character. He spent a lot of his summers as a teenager working on family ranches, the Hamilton Ranch and other local ranches, and this is where he really learned about the dreams of people, about what they wanted, about how they connected to the land, their hopes, their fears, their ability to want to get ahead, to earn the dream. So these later informed all of his novels, and once again, especially the California novels. He went back to New York for a while and worked as a laborer and a journalist, and once again, his experiences there helped him. The character of Slim in Of Mice and Men is either composite of characters that he actually met, or could even be Ed Ricketts, his best friend. He graduated from Salinas High in 1919. Then he went directly to Stanford University. He wasn't much interested in taking a regular course of study. He just took classes that he enjoyed, such as English and writing, and he had a great love for marine biology. He took those courses, but he left after about 5 or 6 years without taking a degree because he just didn't want to go along with the course of study. When he came back to California in 1928, he began writing in earnest. His first few books were not very popular. Cup of Gold, 1929, met with pretty much indifference, both critically and financially. But he continued to write, had a couple more fairly unsuccessful novels, and in 1930 he married Carol Henning. Okay, Carol was a very interesting person. Right, she was essentially his editor. Okay, they lived together in Pacific Grove, which is just outside of Monterey, while he wrote. She served as his editor. He did not like typing very much, so he wrote in longhand, and he wrote very, very small. almost impossible to read. In fact, she was the only person who could read his scrawl. She was also an editor. She was very helpful. And in fact, the original title of Mice and Men was Something That Happened. It's not a real imaginative title, but after reading Robert Burns' poem, To a Mouse, she decided that, well, Of Mice and Men might be a much better title. So she helped him out with not only titles, but with editing, and she really influenced his work. Also during the 30s, he wrote his first successful novel, Tortilla Flat, 1935, about a bunch of, people call them hobos now, I guess, about a bunch of the underbelly of Monterey, and later he kind of followed that up with Cannery Row, about the same subject. He was very interested in those who were trying to better themselves and who were very colorful in doing so. He also wrote the Red Pony stories during this time. Of Mice and Men, when Steinbeck won the Nobel Prize later in 1962, the Nobel Prize Committee simply referred to Of Mice and Men as that little masterpiece. And certainly not little in terms of importance, but it's only 100 pages, so there's a lot in that book. There were 2 film versions made and a stage play as well. Grapes of Wrath, though, is considered probably his masterpiece. Right? It won the National Book Award. It won the Pulitzer Prize, which is awarded each year for the best American fiction. It was a fairly controversial novel, and it was very successful as well. Steinbeck was very sympathetic to the plight of the working men, and he made no bones about criticizing capitalism, and it caused a lot of controversy. Again, there was a film made the following year. There were a lot of other novels followed during his middle period, such as The Moon is Down in 1942, which was about during World War II, resistance in occupied Norway. Cannery Row, Sweet Thursday, and East of Eden were sort of in his later period. He always felt that East of Eden was his finest novel, even though The Grapes of Wrath certainly is the one that first comes to mind. His best friend, Ed Ricketts, had a big influence on his life. Ed was a marine biologist. He collected samples from the tide pools and sold those to colleges and high schools for dissection. He lived in his laboratory on Cannery Row, and Cannery Row figures prominently in the novel Cannery Row, and so does his lab. Unfortunately, Ed Ricketts died at the 1948. He was hit by a train at that time. In Cannery Row, there were no crossing rails, and he was hit by a train. He lived for about 3 days. Unfortunately, Steinbeck was in New York at the time, and he tried to come back in time. Took him 3 days, but he didn't make it. So that was a regret that he always had. It haunted him that he never got to see his friend. Steinbeck also covered World War II. He was a correspondent. He also covered later the Vietnam War as well. He had 2 other marriages, a brief and not happy one to Gwen Conger, and later his 3rd wife, Elaine Scott. They married in 1950, and that one was pretty successful. In fact, they stayed married until John Steinbeck died. 1952 was when East of Eden was finished. A lot of people think that was his last great book. He certainly enjoyed it. He kept a journal of writing it, and there was also a pretty amazing film version made of the book as well. In the Nobel Prize Citation, 1962, the committee said he received this award for realistic and imaginative writing, distinguished by sympathetic humor and a keen social perception. And that probably applies to almost every novel that he's written. He also won a Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1964. And Of Mice and Men is still taught today in secondary schools, middle schools, and high schools. In fact, it's the most popular Steinbeck book that is taught. So the book lives on for many, many reasons. For those of you who are in the area of Salinas and Monterey, there are a lot of resources. You can see Steinbeck's boyhood home, where he grew up, a beautiful Victorian. And then just down the road from that is the National Steinbeck Center. And the National Steinbeck Center is a wonderful hands-on museum, and it's the only museum of its type in the country devoted to a single author. So that is an incredible resource. Also, at Ricketts Lab, it's being turned over to the city of Monterey, and people can now begin taking tours of Ed Ricketts' lab. And especially for those who have read the novel Cannery Row, they'll recognize the lab in there because there's a lot of scenes that take place there. There's also Ed Ricketts' death memorial with a bust of him. And as you walk around Cannery Row, there are several busts and markers and remnants of the old Cannery Row. He died in 1968 and survived by his son Thomas, who is also a writer, and until recently, a couple years ago, his wife Elaine. So he lived a very full and sometimes controversial life.